So good afternoon, and without any further delay, let me start our next session for trauma. I think our session begins on trauma and the principles of management and the various varieties of trauma that we see. So we have today with us a wonderful array of speakers, a beautiful mix of young and old, of experience and youth. So our chairman today is Dr. Vatsal Parekh. He is a senior consultant from Mumbai City, and he is a retina specialist who has probably one of the first batches from Shankar Netralaya. Our co-chairman today will be Dr. Manish Papaye. I don't see him, but he is a very senior person and senior retina surgeon from Nasik. Dr. Ashish Jain, I just saw him, I think.
Yes, sir. Hi, sir.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Ashish.
Hi, sir.
And I'll be moderating the session. So without any further delay, I think let me begin the session with our galaxy of speakers. The first speaker, Dr. Rushikesh Naigaonkar. Dr. Rushikesh is from Jalna, Ganpati Netralaya. He's a senior consultant. Is Dr. Rushikesh here?
Yeah, I'm sharing the screen.
Okay, Dr. Rushikesh. So I think Dr. Rushikesh, without further delay, let us please start with your presentation on posterior segment management of penetrating trauma.
Can you all see the presentation?
Yes, sir.
Have you all seen the presentation?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, organizers, for giving this opportunity to me to have this presentation in front of the audience. The topic given to me is posterior segment management of the open lobe injury. We all come across a lot of patients with penetrating trauma. With Diwali on the cards, these patients have already started pouring in. Some patients are lucky to have minimum or no posterior segment involvement, and some patients do have posterior segment involvement, but it's not significant enough to need any treatment for that. Most of these cases resolve on this own, and some cases, especially the ones which I have narrated here, may need or almost always need a surgical intervention. The indications for treatment are in cases of open lobe injuries. The posterior segment complications are non-resolving vitreous hemorrhage, retinal detachment or incarceration, non-resolving hemorrhagic choroidals, endophthalmitis, intraocular foreign body, submacular hemorrhage due to direct retinal impact, and ruptured and dislocated crystalline lens or intraocular lens. So the mainstay of management, of course, is the surgery, and the goals of surgery can be divided into the primary goals and the secondary goals. The primary goals would be to have a watertight wound closure, because that is of utmost importance, and without that, any further intervention won't be possible. Restoration of the structural integrity, of course, is very important. We must avoid any tissue incarceration in the wound. We must prevent infection as far as possible, and the IOP management, especially in the later stages of the management, is very important. The secondary goals are management of the cataractous, ruptured or dislocated lens, proper handling of the choroidals if there are any, IOFB management if it's there, and restoration of the anatomic relations to the extent possible, and visual improvement to the extent possible is the ultimate goal. Now, each trauma case is a different case, and we need to have an individualized approach for all these cases. There are a lot of views as to how we should approach these cases. The approach can be a primary combined approach, where we combine the primary wound repair along with the posterior segment management, or we can have a staged approach, which is like you manage the open globe injury first, like suturing the wound first, and then after 7 to 14 days we can do the second surgery. The possible issues with the primary combined approach are the corneal edema and the media haze, wound leak, uveal congestion leading to a lot of intra-op bleeding. Hypotony, of course, is a major issue where, in fact, sometimes you don't even not in a position to insert the trocars and cannulas in place. If there is no clot lysis, it is very difficult to remove the blood clots, and some of these cases may need keratoplasty if the visibility is very poor. The advantages are relatively lesser inflammation and scarring, and reduce cost to the patient and reduce hospital stay. However, the staged approach, that is second surgery, the posterior segment surgery, usually after 7 to 14 days of the primary repair, is the preferred approach, where the media haze is slightly reduced. We have better understanding of the possible intraocular damage, especially on B scan and MRI. Proper surgical approach can be planned as to depending upon what you see on the ultrasound B scan and on clinical examination, of course. And there is reduced uveal congestion, so there is the possibility of intraop bleeding is much lesser. The clot lysis and liquefaction of the suprachoroidal heme would have occurred by then, in most of the cases, and so the drainage, near complete drainage can be achieved in such cases. We can have a better anticipation of the intra-op complications, and we can prepare ourselves better for all these complications. And the possible prognosis, we can have some understanding of that so that we can do a better patient and the relatives counseling. Delayed approach for the secondary glaucoma management, non-clearing vitreous hemorrhage, secondary IOLs, optical keratoplasty, and any complications of the previous VR surgery can be addressed. So proper pre-op evaluation is very important, and this is important for planning the timing of surgery, planning the approach, whether you are going to do primary keratoplasty in the first sitting itself, or what instrumentation you are going to need, the size and location, and so on. Proper lens management can be decided whether you want to preserve the lens or whether you want to do lensectomy, whether it will be a pars plana lensectomy or a limbal approach. And you have better anticipation of the intraop difficulties, like corneal media haze is there, then you may need to scrape the corneal epithelium, and proper counseling of the patients can be done if the evaluation is good. So these are the things that we need to look for in the pre-op setting as to visibility, the clarity of the media, whether there is any hypotony, pre-existing hypotony, whether there is any occult scleral rupture which might have missed at the time of the primary wound repair, the corneal tear repair, hyphema if it's there, and whether there is any corneal blood staining, what is the lens status, whether there is any anterior posterior capsular rupture, zonular dehiscence, and whether the lens is subluxated or dislocated, vitreous hemorrhage, how dense it is, whether there are any membranes inside, or whether there is any vitreous incarceration in the wound, retinal detachment, and if there is any associated subretinal hemorrhage, intraocular foreign body and the possible location of the foreign body, and the clot lysis status of the hemorrhagic choroidals. And optic nerve head avulsion, of course, can be picked up if a proper B scan can be done, and if required, we can do a MRI. This scan is very important. We can get a better idea as to what we are going to deal with. So this can give a fair amount of idea as to what could be the possible picture, intra-op possible picture. Now, the basic principles of vitrectomy are we be putting belt buckle or segmental buckle wherever required and wherever it's possible because of the scarring. We should avoid scleral wound to fix the cannulae. The appropriate size of the cannula should be used. You need to use 6 mm cannula if you are anticipating choroidals. Use of AC maintainer if the cannula is not visible to begin with, and then you can switch on to the infusion cannula if required during the later stages of the surgery. Management of the cyclodialysis cleft and choroidals. Clear the vitreous from the corneal wound and the scleral wound. This is very important. Otherwise, this could lead to a lot of complications in the future. We must induce PVD in all the cases, and base excision to the extent possible is of utmost importance. Removal of all the pre and subretinal membranes, because otherwise they would lead to recurrences in future, or they can lead to subretinal gliotic membranes in future. Removal of subretinal hemorrhage. Relaxing retinotomy or retinectomy for the incarcerated retina to release the traction. Use of PFCL wherever necessary, and silicone oil tamponade is the preferred mode. As I said earlier, if the media is not clear, sorry for the quality of video here, it's slightly hazy. So we may need to scrape the epithelium if required. Suprachoroidal drainage should be done wherever required to the extent so that the surgery becomes easier. We may need to do relaxing retinotomy and even retinectomy to release any incarceration of the retinal tissue in the scleral wound, and this would allow us better settlement of the retina. And removal of the subretinal blood is very important because this would improve the functionality of the visual improvement of the patient in the future. Lens management, we should always try and preserve the lens if it is clear with intact capsules and zonules. But if at all we plan to remove the lens, the pars plana approach is the preferred approach. We can use the limbal approach in case of hard cataracts. We must remove the entire lens matter because this can become a nidus for inflammation in future. Capsular rim preservation is to be decided on various factors like age of the patient. Like in adults, it would be relatively safer to keep the anterior capsule. But in pediatric age group, especially if there is incarceration of the retina or the vitreous, then sometimes this itself can pull the ciliary body and lead to hypotonia in future. Vitreous in the wound, epithelial and fibrous in growth, and anterior PVR. These are the situations where we would decide against preserving the IOL placement is preferably done at a later date once the capsular corneal suture removal is done, because this would help us address the A-scan issues and the IR power calculation issues in a better manner. We can, of course, plan a combined cataract surgery like PCIOL with a scleral fixated IOL with either vortex sutures or Yamane or glued IOL, with or without irododialysis repair wherever it's necessary. The possible intra-op difficulties, as I've discussed a few already, like corneal edema, which may need scraping, or even keratoplasty if it's a significant corneal edema. The subluxation of IOL, we should try and reposition the IOL if possible, and if the support is adequate. If the support is inadequate, then we'll have to even remove the IOL and do secondary IOL placement, like a scleral fixated IOL or any other suitable method. Non-visibility of the cornea during surgery is this issue needs to be addressed aptly. Otherwise, this can lead to disastrous complications like suprachoroidal even bleeding or choroidals. AC maintainer can be used in such cases to begin with. We can approach the infusion cannula and tease with the help of either a cutter, light pipe, or even MVR based on whatever instruments you have in your hand. Cyclodialysis cleft should be identified pre-op if possible, and then suture it adequately. So to conclude, never delay the primary wound repair. Watertight primary wound closure is the key. Timing of vitrectomy is of utmost importance. And each trauma case, as I told earlier, needs individualized approach. A holistic approach of treatment is required, considering the entire eyeball in toto. Never give up. Modern vitrectomy instrumentation and techniques can give rewarding results. Document all the pre, intra, and post-op findings, and these are very important from the medical legal point of view in all cases of trauma. Good pre and post-op counseling is very important, and this would avoid a lot of litigations in future. And always under-promise and over-deliver is the key as far as managing trauma cases is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for a comprehensive overview. We are running short of time, so I think I won't take any questions right now. We'll make the questions at the end of the session. We'll move to our next speaker with permission of the chairman, Parikh sir.
Yes, sir, please.
Next person is Dr. Ashish. Dr. Ashish.
Hi, sir.
Please go ahead.
I'll be presenting a short video on the intraocular foreign bodies, different case scenarios. So is my video visible?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Your audio is muted, I think.
Okay, just a minute, sir.
All the effects are seen, but the audio is muted.
Now is it heard?
No.
No.
Okay, I'll just start again. Yeah, Now I think we
body
heard.
lodged
Is it
in the
heard?
subconjunctival region,
Yeah.
which is removed with the help of a superior rectus metal forging. Metal hitting metal at high speeds, so much so that Odin, the father of Thor, was not spared from the hammer injury, thus presenting intraocular foreign body case scenarios. In case 1, we see a foreign body lodged in the subconjunctival region, which is removed with the help of a superior rectus forceps. In case 2, we see a traumatic endophthalmitis. After lensectomy and vitrectomy, we retrieve the foreign body with the help of intravitreal forceps. The foreign body is then removed with the help of a handshake technique through a limbal incision. Case 3 is a traumatic endophthalmitis with the IOFB lodged in the superior pars plana region, thus necessitating the removal of the IOL, following which the intraocular foreign body is removed with the help of a McPherson forceps through the limbal incision made for IOL explantation. Case 4, we have a case of traumatic endophthalmitis with the foreign body lodged in the pars plana region. A lensectomy is done with the help of a cutter. Following that, a peripheral vitrectomy was done in which the foreign body was seen enmeshed in the exudates. The foreign body falls into the vitreous cavity, which is then retrieved using a magnet. The intraocular foreign body is then brought out with the help of a handshake technique using the intraocular foreign body forceps through a sclerotomy port. In case 5, we see a large ceramic foreign body lodged in the anterior retina, which is brought out using a superior rectus forceps because of the large configuration of the foreign body. Case 6, we see a wooden foreign body lodged anteriorly enmeshed in the exudates. Following vitrectomy, a laser is done around the retinal break. Following that, the foreign body is brought out with the help of an intraocular forceps through the limbal route. Case 7 is a case of firecracker injury. A decompensated cornea requires a temporary keratoprosthesis, which facilitates vitrectomy. During vitrectomy, a gunpowder was seen dispersed throughout the vitreous cavity. Also, in the anterior region and in the pars plana, the gunpowder was noted to be deposited, enmeshed in the vitreous. It was removed with the help of the cutter, following which a corneal grafting was done. Case 8, we see a pre-retinal IOFB. After induction of the PVD with the help of a cutter, the IOFB is disengaged with the surrounding vitreous. The IOFB is then brought out with the help of a magnet through a scleral port. The PFCL used helps preventing the damage to the posterior pole during such maneuvers. Case 9, we see the IOFB lodged in the retina. A laser photocoagulation is done before removing the IOFB. A curved corneal scissor can be seen to remove the vitreous attachment of the IOFB, which is then brought about with a McPherson forceps. Case 10, we see a retinal detachment along with a large IOFB in the superior arcade. A chandelier-based illumination system is used for removal of the IOFB with the help of bimanual vitrectomy. This IOFB is brought out through the scleral incision. Case 11. We see a subretinal foreign body. Optic barrage laser is done around the retinal injury. A MVR blade is used to tease the retina, which helps in removal of the IOFB. The IOFB is later removed with the help of a magnet. In a similar case, we see a large intraocular foreign body lodged at the optic nerve head subretinally. The MVR is used to tease the retina above the foreign body. Using the sharp tip, the foreign body is elevated and brought out from the subretinal space. This foreign body was later removed with the help of a magnet. Thus, a high suspicion should be kept in every case of trauma and a CT scan should be ordered. Magnet is a useful tool for ferrous intraocular foreign bodies. A limbal incision should be placed 180 degree apart from the IFB for better accessibility. Lensectomy, when required, to be done without hesitation. Vitreoretinal damage if suspected, the IOL should be deferred. PFCL helps in preventing accidental injury to the posterior pole. A bimanual vitrectomy with chandelier. Thank you.
Ash is excellent.
Brilliant.
I think I
Brilliant.
haven't seen such a beautiful collection till now.
I would like to thank Preetham
Excellent.
sir and Saili ma'am for these amazing collection. It is surgeries done by me, Preetham sir and Saili ma'am at DJ Hospital, sir.
Great.
Excellent. Next, we invite our good friend and dynamic Mahesh to talk on endophthalmitis. Mahesh.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Before that, let me congratulate Ashish for excellent variety of videos with lots of, scenarios. Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you,
Thank you, sir. I'll begin my presentation. Is my screen visible?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you. So I'll be briefly covering the topic of endophthalmitis in the cases of trauma. As we are all aware, the management depends on the amount of injury, whether there is a foreign body. The time since injury is a very important determinant factor for the final visual outcome, as also is the presenting visual acuity. To identify a gram-negative like a nocardia is one of the worst case scenarios. So identification of the organism becomes a very important part of prognostication and treatment. As also the choice of antibiotics, nowadays we find that many of these organisms are quite resistant to the routine antibiotics of fourth generation cephalosporin. So identification and institution of correct antibiotics as per the case is of vital importance for the prognosis in case of endophthalmitis. Obviously, a removal of an intraocular foreign body contributes largely to a stable globe and to good vision. Early vitrectomy has the best outcomes when it comes to anatomy as well as in cases of giving vision. To look at it as from the extent of injury, a corneal wound would be would probably give a better outcome compared to a corneoscleral wound. This has been proven in multiple studies, because the limbal wound tends to affect the ciliary body and can lead to eventual hypotony and phthisis. Having an IOFB, which is metallic, has a slightly better outcome compared to a non-metallic IOFB, especially if it is operated early. In the late scenarios, IOFBs have the same outcomes. Also, the velocity at which the IOFB has injured various tissue matters a lot to the final visual outcome. As discussed in the previous slide, a delayed presentation has a poor visual prognosis. While at presentation, if you have a tissue loss, if you have no light perception, and if you have ancillary trauma to the orbital wall, you are more likely to have a poor prognosis. I'll just pause here for a very important part of the slide of this presentation here is about the medical legal part of documentation of trauma. I think the first thing that we need to really consider is documentation of what we see. So a clinical photograph is very vital, be it in the form of a mobile photograph or a slit lamp photograph. But this is a very vital part of documentation of what was the anatomy at presentation. Visual acuity at presentation, if we have a video of this, this makes a lot of sense. So also, as we start talking about the prognosis at every juncture, if you have an audio video recording in our room, I think we have started using this in most of our cases, even for routine cataract cases. But this has been a lot of help for us for preventing later allegation in hindsight, patients say no, whatever allegations from patients. So this was the very important part of endophthalmitis management in trauma. I think here I want to compare the traumatic endophthalmitis with a routine post-surgical endophthalmitis. On the left-hand side, you can see that the endophthalmitis vitrectomy study found that most of the organisms were gram-positive Staphylococcus epidermidis variety. Whereas in the right-hand side of the slide, you see the organisms are a polymicro. It's a polymicrobial infection. We are more likely to encounter gram-positive variety of the Enterococcus species and also lots of gram-negative variety. The role of ultrasound B-scan in endophthalmitis, I think here I would like to say that a closed globe injury would lend itself for ultrasound B-scan. Obviously, in an open globe, you would rather not touch the eye at all with a B-scan probe. It has medico-legal value again in terms of documentation of the retinal status or the choroidal status, or also documenting a presence of an intraocular foreign body. Sequential ultrasound B-scans can tell us about the vitreous membranes, whether they're reducing. Identification of vitreous membranes versus vitreous hemorrhage becomes a slightly problematic issue in ultrasound. But I think retinal status and choroidal status can be easily documented and they can be followed for prognostication. To look at vitrectomy for endophthalmitis, I think there are certain tips that I would like to share here. The first and foremost being the type of anesthesia that we use. Given that a globe has been ruptured, there is endophthalmitis, general anesthesia is a preferred anesthesia so that we don't distort the globe any further. Having access to the anterior chamber or to the vitreous for culture and sensitivity of the organism is a vital first step of treating endophthalmitis. Knowing well that the eyeball is going to be soft, so the approach should be that you want to have an AC maintainer or a long cannula in the posterior segment, which is about 6 millimeter or so that you are clearly inside the vitreous cavity. The first step would always be to clear the anterior segment with a thorough wash. And if there is a bit of cataract, I think we should not hesitate to do a lensectomy and remove the cataract. As I was saying, if the infusion cannula is not seen, then the ideal way to go about would be to use the AC maintainer and go about cleaning the anterior segment. But I nowadays, I'm going to show you in the video as well, I also use an endolight or sometimes other techniques to identify whether the infusion port is inside the vitreous cavity. A generous anterior vitrectomy is a vital part because the membranes in the anterior part of the vitreous tend to be more thicker compared to the posterior part, and there could be traction as we insert and remove instruments inside the vitrectomy ports. And posterior vitrectomy, gingerly starting around this, and then moving to the periphery is the ideal way. If you approach a foreign body, I think metallic foreign body, clear as many membranes as possible. Retinal trauma, the site of the impact, I think you need to make sure that you don't use any vacuum over there and laser the edges of the impact site. LPFC is a good idea, especially you don't want the subretinal heme to trickle and also the foreign body to hit on the macula. Use of appropriate intraocular magnets and foreign body forceps and silicone oil post-operative in case of any retinal detachment. I think a generous cover of broad spectrum antibiotics peri-operative is a vital part of the management. as well as intraocular. I nowadays use piperacillin tazobactam for most of my cases, with a repetition as and when necessary. So brief video of how I go about doing my surgeries. As you can see, I'm putting the infusion port. It's a 26 number needle which I put inside and check the tip of the 26 number needle before putting the cannula inside, making sure that we remove as much of thick material from the anterior chamber and cleaning up the anterior chamber. There could be haze initially, with the cornea becoming suddenly hazy, but as soon as the IOP is well managed and the wounds are cleared, you can see here the cleaning up and the clarity improves. Approach the anterior vitreous slowly, carefully. Make sure that the vitreous cutter is fresh and not dragging on the vitreous. Gingerly, as I said, go towards the disc and the posterior pole. You can see a bit of air bubble in the anterior vitreous. Gradually approach the periphery. Don't be in a rush to induce the PVD. A PVD induction is not necessary always. If it's possible, yes. If it's not, we can leave the vitreous and clear as much murky vitreous as possible. Those tiny stuck-on appearance of exudates on the retina with the hemorrhages, we leave them as it is. Do not try to vigorously aspirate on those exudates. And as you can see, the vitreous starts clearing and you can easily institute your intravitreal antibiotics with the clearing of the vitreous. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mahesh.
Thank you so much.
Can you stop sharing, Mahesh?
Yeah.
The screen?
Yeah.
It was, I think, excellent collection and good lecture. Next is Saumil talking on out of the box foreign body management. Saumil has been, I think, since I know him, he has always out of the box thinking. Saumil, are you ready?
I'm ready. Mahesh, can you stop sharing your presentation?
Yeah. Is it stopped?
No,
it's
still
not.
there.
Still there.
It's still there? Hold on. Hang on a second.
I think audio visual people are there probably.
Yeah, I think it's
Sai Numerotech. Anybody from Sai Numerotech?
yeah. Is my presentation visible now?
Yeah, it's visible.
Yes,
So
visible.
please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, MOS, Preetham and Swapnish, for the opportunity. Mine is also an equally traumatic presentation after the trauma presentations that we've seen of the previous two speakers. Though lesser in magnitude as compared to what Ashish's videos had. Amazing stuff, Ashish and Preetham and Saili. So I'm going to be continuing the same topic, giving you more examples. And forget the fancy title, the irony of ironic foreign bodies. The irony is in the fact that the approach is a little bit out of the box, not the usual conventional way people would approach it. Secondly, all these ironic foreign bodies, the magnet has been of least use to me when I've approached them, as you will see how. So the first patient is an intravitreal pars plana foreign body. This I've presented before, probably it may be a repetition, but I always like to begin with this case because it gives you a good insight as to how you can approach stuff. Pars plana and foreign body with 6/6 vision, very clear lens, no retinal tears, well-healed, self-sealed scleral perforation. In fact, the patient keeps on asking us as to why we are actually operating him, especially when you tell him that your foreign body is here somewhere on the pars plana, is seen on the CT scan, and everything else is clear. You have 6/6 vision, but upon removing the foreign body, you can have a risk of detachment. You'll require another surgery. You may have to remove your lens, put an IOL, and you'll no longer probably be left with 6/6 vision. So the patient actually wants to opt out of the surgery, and the surgeon decides, let's see if we can have an alternative approach. And this was my approach to the surgery. What I do is take a stay suture, open up the conjunctiva, mark the foreign body site as you see over here with a pink marker, open up a sort of a scleral flap at the site of the pars plana where I'm going to approach the foreign body. So mind you that I'm not going intraocular at all. I'm all the time staying extraocular. After raising the superficial flap, I make a deep flap, very similar to a deep sclerectomy. This acts like a trapdoor in case things were to go out of hand. And you see a choroidal knuckle right through. I cauterize the choroidal knuckle so as to prevent bleeding. Just make a tiny nick over there. And as I see a little bit of a vitreous bulge there, I put my magnet in and out comes the foreign body. So no harm, no foul. You don't go intraocular at all. You cut the little bit of vitreous that is there near the wound. You suture the superficial as well as the deep scleral flaps individually. On following up the patient postoperatively, he never developed a cataract. Yes, I did do a little bit of cryo around the area of the foreign body to prevent maybe retinal trauma and retinal tears later on, but the patient continued to maintain good vision. So this was an intravitreal magnetic iron foreign body, which I removed through the anterior route, and quite likely so because the patient had a traumatic cataract, almost total cataract, which was removed by lens aspiration after suturing the corneal tear. This foreign body was approached through a scleral tunnel rather than making just a corneal wound so as to not damage the corneal endothelium. Did vitrectomy, induced PVD, probably should have put PFCL to prevent the backlash of the foreign body on the retina, picked it up with a magnet, with a handover technique, passed it on to the intraocular forceps, and with the help of a Vectis, removed it out through the corneoscleral wound. A relatively smooth process, not that much damaging as compared to removing it from the pars plana, which could damage the retina. Did an endo laser, and that was the end of the surgery. So things are not going to be that easy from now on. It was the same intravitreal, very similar case, intravitreal magnetic iron foreign body, which I had to remove to the pars plana because the lens was clear in this case. So couldn't remove the lens out. And since I thought, let's say it's a very small foreign body and the vitreous looks very, very clean, I might as well get away with a very small pars plana incision, which I do. I put in a magnet there. And now what I have to do is align the foreign body in the direction so that it comes out through a much smaller incision. And it does not really, maybe the choroid is preventing, or I really do not know, the magnet is not probably strong enough. The foreign body is too small for its magnetic effect. So what I do now is try to do a handover from forceps to forceps, and it falls down again. Probably should have put PFCL. The third time around, I remove it with the help of an intravitreal forceps. Not using the magnet has not come of any use here. So again, similar case, intravitreal magnetic iron foreign body, which I'm removing through the pars plana because of a clear lens, but this time the foreign body is not that small. It is also a little bit oddly shaped and it has really sharp edges. So I do a vitrectomy, I make an extension at the pars plana. You see the lens is absolutely clear. And I make approximately a 3 to 4 millimeter wound in the sclera. Try to pick it up with a magnet, and you see over here, see the tentative, the body keeps on falling. Probably it's not as magnetic as I thought, and it's not aligning itself in the direction, the way it has to come out along the long axis because of its polarity. So I try to hold the magnet and I'm actually thinking here, I don't want to touch the lens. The eye is phakic, the lens is absolutely clear. I give an attempt opening out the scleral wound with a lens forceps, but all I let out is a choroidal knuckle and a whole lot of vitreous, and the foreign body remains inside. So this is another attempt 7, attempt 8, probably attempt 9, and the foreign body keeps falling. I don't feel magnet is the right way to go about removing this. Again, the magnet over here, I'm ruminating as to what I should be doing. The lens here is clear. I do not want to sacrifice it as far as possible. The last attempt that I made is roll over the foreign body so that I can grasp it within the reach of my forceps. And then I try to remove it, holding the long axis along the direction of the incision that I've made. And I'm able to successfully remove this foreign body through the pars plana. And you see the lens has been clear all this while, and the patient has had a good outcome. So intravitreal magnetic iron foreign body with pars plana removal, again through a clear phakic lens. A similar case as previous. Again, the foreign body, this is more rectangular, more squarish as compared to the previous case that was rectangular. Here also, I think this is an IOL here. So at least I have the relief that I'm not be touching the lens in any case. So I extend this wound a little bit, and all this while trying to use a magnet. It's not going to get the foreign body out. It just got caught here in the wound, and just by the flow of the fluid along with the forceps, I'm able to get the foreign body out. Again, magnet is of assistance here, but has not been of that great use. The last case is actually not an iron foreign body, but I want to include it as a part of it because it's a copper foreign body. Some people say you can keep it inside, but you are having, though the patient has 6/6 vision, the patient has a chalcotic lens, probably will develop copper toxicity later on in life. There are no retinal tears, well-healed self-sealing scleral perforation, and this is how I approached it. Did there exists cell staining because of the chalcotic cataract? You see there is copper staining there, and you do a hydrodissection, you complete your cataract surgery, put in an IOL, and then go on to removing the foreign body. The foreign body here is actually a copper wire, which you will see suddenly in the periphery of the retina coming into view, and it is very, very badly entangled in the vitreous, so much so that you have to actually free it from all the vitreous adhesions as much as possible. And now seemingly it is lying on the retina, but there is still this tuft of vitreous that is adherent to the foreign body. And now you pick it up and try to separate it from the remaining vitreous. And slowly, once the foreign body is completely free from all that action, you try to remove it along the long axis and you remove it through the 23 gauge cannula itself. Now you laser the area of where the foreign body has ricocheted on the retina, and you check the periphery well. And this patient also went on to develop a similarly good outcome of 6/6 vision as what he had pre-operatively, but we still had to remove the foreign body. So thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Somil, I had just 2-3 points to make. I always remove the fibrous capsule of the foreign body. Maybe the patient you showed there, you could remove the fibrous capsule and you could take out with the forceps. So always remove the fibrous capsule because then the magnet would work better. And number 2, I usually make the scleral incision with a Bart Parker blade, because I try to err on larger incision, because sometimes if the incision is small or if the choroid is not properly perforated, the foreign body may not come out. And thirdly, previously when we was young, means about 30 years back, there used to be giant magnets for the same purpose what you showed. You showed it beautifully well, but there was a giant magnet they used to use. There was no intraocular approach that time.
Correct, sir. Sir, points well taken actually, sir. I didn't have an electromagnet with me, but I felt that that could have been the need of the hour.
Lovely. I think great videos from you, Somil. I think even I agree that some of the cases you can easily use a forceps to get the foreign body right up to the edge of your wound and then extract it with a forceps. You need not always use a magnet for all the foreign bodies. Thank you so much. We move on to our next speaker, Dr. Kaushal. He'll be speaking on blunt trauma and management of it. Dr. Kaushal, is he around?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Is my screen visible, sir?
Yes, please.
Yes. Just. Yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. So I will be presenting on blunt trauma and posterior segment presentation. Is my screen visible and my audio is audible?
Yes.
Yes, yes. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. So I'll just in a brief talk about the BETS classification. So eye injury on the basis of full thickness or partial thickness can be classified as open globe injury or closed globe injury. Open globe injury is further classified into laceration and rupture. And laceration is further classified into intraocular foreign body penetrating injury and perforating injury. In closed globe injury, we have lamellar laceration and contusion. So the mode of blunt trauma, it may be a direct injury or an indirect injury. And the mode of injury following this blunt trauma can be either because of the 4 factors. Number 1, the mechanical tearing of the tissue of the eyeball. Second, damage to the tissue cell, which directly hampers the physiological function. Third, the vascular damage, which causes ischemia, hemorrhage, and edema. And fourth, the trophic changes due to disturbances in the nerve supply. And the most common site of injury is basically the just below the injection of the recti muscle. Secondly, at the equator. Third, at the corneoscleral limbus. fourth at the insertion of the optic nerve, and fifth at the previous site of any intraocular surgery. The mechanism of injury, it basically depends on the direct impact on the globe, whether there is a which causes further the compression wave force, then the reflected compression wave force which causes countercoup injury, the rebound compression wave force, and an indirect trauma from the surrounding elastic tissue and the bony margins. Whenever there is a blunt trauma, there occurs there occurs decrease in the anterior posterior diameter, and there is an increase in the equatorial diameter, leading to damage of the tissues which are arranged in circumferential patterns, leading to the 7th ring of trauma, causing iris sphincter tear, iridodialysis. Then we have angle recession, damage to the trabecular meshwork, then cyclodialysis, zonular dialysis, and lastly retinal dialysis. So just a brief about cyclodialysis. So in cyclodialysis, there is separation of the ciliary body from the scleral spur, and which is seen gonioscopically, and in OCD or in UBM will aid in the diagnosis, as here we can see that there is a scleral, there is a choroidal cleft, and there is a communication between the anterior chamber and the suprachoroidal space. Usually these cyclodialysis cleft do not require treatment, but if there is changes because of chronic hypotony, then the following treatment can be considered. Belt buckle with cryopexy or a direct cyclopexy can be done. Now, posterior segment injuries. So because of the anteroposterior compression and the equatorial enlargement, there is damage to the blood vessels of the iris, ciliary body, retina, and choroid, leading to vitreous hemorrhage, retinal hemorrhage. And in a case of vitreous hemorrhage, it is better to get an ultrasound done, because we don't know what about the underlying structure, and these may aid in the diagnosis of retinal detachment, choroidal detachment. And next is commotio retinae. So commotio retinae occurs due to the outer retinal layer damage due to the shock wave that traverses the eye from the site of impact. It is most commonly seen on the posterior pole, but may occur in the periphery as well. It is usually seen within a few hours of trauma, and it clears 3 to 4 weeks, and no is required as such. However, commotio retinae can be classified into retinal concussion and retinal contusion, the concussion being a milder version with a reversible vision loss, whereas in contusion, there is intense retinal whitening with retinal hemorrhages and persistent vision loss. Traumatic macular hole, the mechanism of injury involved in traumatic macular hole is contusion necrosis and traction of the traction, which is because of the trauma. Macular hole is seen after severe Berlin's edema, or when there is severe cystoid macular edema following trauma, or whiplash separation of the vitreous from the retina. It may not develop immediately, but it may take some time to develop. In many of the cases where in younger age group, when the size of the macular hole is small, which is less than 1/3 disc diameter, and where there is no surrounding puff of fluid, these macular hole may get closed spontaneously. But if it doesn't get closed spontaneously, then vitrectomy with ileum peeling and gas tamponade might be needed. Retinal tears and breaks. The dialysis is the most common type of retinal break post-trauma. However, HST, operculated hole, macular hole, GRT are also noted. The traumatic retinal breaks are predominantly noted in the area of vitreous base. Cox et al. Reported that 59% of the cases with traumatic RD had break limited to the aura, and Johnston et al. Reported that 85% of the patients with traumatic retinal tear developed RD. So retinal dialysis. In dialysis, as we all know, that the posterior edge is attached to the vitreous base, and it accounts for 8 to 14% of the traumatic RD, and it is caused by mechanical disruption of the retina by force which is transmitted via the vitreous base, and it may develop at the time of injury or months or years, even years after injury. The most common site is superonasal and inferotemporal. Stephen postulated that the nasal periphery has narrow vitreous base, so greater susceptibility than the rest quadrants, and ITQ being because of the orbital anatomy, it is least protected. So this is the other common site of dialysis. So choroidal rupture. A choroid rupture usually occurs because of the inelastic nature of the RPE Brooks complex and choriocapillaris complex. So a choroidal rupture can be a direct choroidal rupture or an indirect choroidal rupture. Direct choroidal rupture are usually rare and they tend to occur parallel to the aura. Whereas indirect choroidal rupture are usually noted near the posterior pole and they occur in a concentric fashion and in a crescent shape to the optic disc. The majority of tear occur temporal to the disc and involve the fovea. But 10% of the cases of choroidal rupture are associated with CNVM, and the factors which are responsible are old age, macular location, and greater length of rupture. As normal treatment of CNVM, these CNVM also require intravitreal anti-VEGF for the treatment. Now, chorioretinitis clopidemia. Chorioretinitis clopidemia is a closed globe ocular injury which causes rupture of the choroid and retina, but the sclera being intact because of a high projectile which lies very close to the globe. The fundus findings shows retinal hemorrhage, intraretinal hemorrhage, vitreous hemorrhage in a bare sclera. The visual prognosis usually depends on the extent and location of the intraocular injury. In spite of severe intraocular injury, these patients have low chances of RD because of marked proliferation of the fibrous tissue, causing firm adherence between the retina and the choroid to sclera. The treatment is usually observation and surgical if there is a concern of globe rupture and or RD alongside scleroderma. A traumatic optic neuropathy can be direct or indirect. It ranges from simple contusion to complete avulsion of the optic nerve. The most common cause of traumatic optic neuropathy is indirect injury to the nerve. The signs are decreased vision, decreased color vision, RAPD, and visual field defect. CT scan is must, and a 1 mm axial scan should be obtained, which helps in diagnosis of compression of optic nerve by hematoma, bony fragment, which impinge on the optic nerve, which would require future surgical intervention. Treatment observation versus high dose steroid, and high dose steroid should be given within 8 hours. However, according to CRASH study in patients who had head injury, when high dose steroid was given, there were increased fatalities which were observed in these patients. Optic nerve diversion, the patient will complain of immediate visual loss after trauma, and now on B, and this can be easily picked up on B scan, where an optic nerve which is not seen to reach the optic disc and an area of hypolucency was seen anteriorly just posterior to the optic nerve head. Scleral rupture. The scleral rupture, it may occur in severe blunt trauma, and it may be direct or indirect, indirect being more common. And the site in phakic eye, it is just posterior to the insertion of the recti muscle, whereas in pseudophakic, it is at the limbus. Most of the time, the scleral rupture is occult, and we can easily recognize this by the visual acuity of patient being PL or no PL. There is severe chemosis, large subconjunctival hemorrhage, ocular hypotony, hyphema, abnormally deep or shallow AC, and associated vitreous hemorrhage. Management, careful globe exploration, and early primary repair is key to the treatment. Chorioretinopathies from indirect ocular injury. Pusch's retinopathy. Pusch's retinopathy is described as a chorioretinopathy which is associated with indirect trauma and non-ocular injury. It is seen in severe patient with severe head trauma, and the fundus findings include cottonwool spots, retinal hemorrhages, optic disc edema, and Pusch's flecken. The condition resolves spontaneously on its own, but it might take at least 1 to 3 months for the findings to get resolved. Puschel-like retinopathy, in this the fundus findings are typical of Puschel retinopathy, but there is no history of trauma. However, there is associated systemic history like patient having acute pancreatitis, pancreatic adenocarcinoma, renal failure, and preeclampsia. Terson's syndrome. Terson's syndrome is now recognized as intraocular hemorrhage associated with subarachnoid hemorrhage, intracerebral hemorrhage, or traumatic brain injury. The hemorrhage may be present at various levels, and these hemorrhage usually take around 3 to 6 months to get resolved. But if the vitreous hemorrhage persists, then vitrectomy can be done. Shaken baby syndrome is a kind of abusive head trauma. It is usually seen in age group of less than 2 years. It is caused by violent shaking of baby with impact injury to head, and ocular findings are always bilateral, and there is associated poor vision, RAPD, periocular bruising, and subconjunctival hemorrhage. Retinal hemorrhage is present at multiple levels and mostly over the posterior pole. The treatment, mostly it will, the hemorrhages will clear spontaneously within 4 weeks. But if the hemorrhages doesn't clear, vitreous hemorrhage doesn't clear, then a vitrectomy is needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kaushal. I think it's a thorough revision of blunt trauma. I think I was reminded of some of these Kansky chapters. With this, we are coming to the end of the trauma session. Before we end, I think I have a few questions for Parikh sir. Parikh sir, if you're around. Sir,
yeah, he's there. Can I interrupt for a second? I just want to say thank you to Vatsal bhai, you, Mahesh bhai, Manoj Dada, Pritam, and everybody who took part. Thank you so much. Thank you. Vatsal sir, hi Somel, thank you so much. Ashish, thank you. Sorry I interrupted. Thank you so much. I've been quietly listening. I didn't want to interrupt because not that I know anything in retina.
You know everything.
that means you know everything, ma'am.
No, not at all. You know, you have to blame Pritam and everybody, you know, Ashish and Ashwin and all, Saili for me not knowing anything in retina because they are the best.
Madam, when the matter comes to you, then you are the final judge.
No, not in retina.
You know everything.
Vatsal bhai knows me for the last so many years since I was a student.
So your audio is muted.
Sir, you're muted, sir.
Ragini, they have to thank you because you are not putting your head. They can learn so many things. Otherwise, they wouldn't have a chance to learn.
I completely agree.
Yeah. Good afternoon, Gomad sir.
Okay. Well, with this, we
Thank
move
you.
on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Sorry
ma'am.
for interrupting, Mahesh Dada. Please continue.
No problem, ma'am. Thank you. Any questions from anybody in the audience? No, I think,
You're
sir,
finishing in time.
Sir, last question before we close this session.
Yeah.
In your experience, any particular case which comes to your mind, sir, which was very difficult, Parikh sir?
See, I had a case of traumatic endophthalmitis
Mhm.
where I did vitrectomy. I couldn't locate the foreign body, and I think I had fracture or something. Patient needed resurgery, so I referred to Anand Gupta, and he found the foreign body. So I think a vigilant look for foreign body is a must, you know.
Anything, Saumil, you would like to add?
I feel the session was very enlightening. Excellent plethora of videos and very nice inputs from you as well as Vatsal, Parikh sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Naigaonkar, Ashish, Saumil, Parikh sir, and Dr. Sanghvi. Thank you so much. We move on to the next session. Thank you.